Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and I have been playing a ton of Legends of Runeterra in the past couple days, and I wanted to give some of my initial thoughts and impressions of the game. Bear in mind that it is still in a preview patch, which means it's very early on in the beta process, and a lot of the things I'm going to talk about here are definitely going to be subject to change before it releases probably sometime early in 2020. So let's hop into a game, and I'll kind of talk through some of my thoughts on the gameplay here. My favorite deck that I've been playing is something I call Sharknado. It's an ephemeral-based deck. It's a very aggressive Shadow Isles and Ionia deck based around Hecarim, as well as the namesake card Shark Chariot. So this won't be too much of a tutorial. This kind of presumes you already know how to play, or at least understand the basics of the game. There are plenty of great tutorials out there. I know Riot themselves have put out very good tutorial videos. But I just want to talk through some of my initial thoughts on the mechanics and the design of the game and the cards. So first off, we get a good mulligan. We can mulligan any one of these four cards, as many as we like. I definitely want to keep the Shark Chariot. He's kind of the namesake of the deck. But these other spells are a little bit more situational, and I'm going to send those back. So we get a pretty decent hand here. We've got our Shark Chariot. We got a couple spells and a couple good units, including the real big hitter Hecarim, who is kind of like a one-man wrecking crew. This deck is not very good on the super early game. I don't have too many 1 or 2 drops. Our opponent doesn't have a 1 drop either. They are actually on offense first, which means that we'll actually get to be on offense on round 2, which is sometimes better. In a lot of card games, you always want to be going first, right? And most of the time in Hearthstone, you just always want to go first because you get the extra tempo, you get to attack first, and so on. But in this game, there's some differences where you only get to attack, normally. There's some things that change this up. But in a normal game, whoever goes first gets to attack on the odd number turns on manas 1, 3, 5, and 7. And the people going second, like I am this game, will get to attack on the even number turns, 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. And that creates an interesting dynamic where you want to make like a deck that has good actions whether you're going first or second. Some decks are going to be better going first, or some decks are going to be better going second. It can definitely depend. Here, our opponent is going to get to attack, and I'm on defense, and I don't really want to take this big hit. I'm kind of thinking of playing this Darkwater Scourge, but then that's going to leave me with very little action otherwise. So I might just have to take this hit. We're going to take 5, but then on our attack on turn 4, we'll be able to attack with a big 5/5 Life Stealer and probably gain all of that right back. The problem is that the way this works is you don't really have your turn, like in traditional card games. Like I have my turn, you have your turn, and we alternate back and forth. Here we have kind of shared rounds, but there is a little bit of a difference in sometimes you're the attacker, sometimes you're the defender, which kind of gives you like it's my turn because I'm on offense, but my opponent can still play cards. Like they can still play all their normal cards, they just don't get to attack on this round. So I'm going to play my Darkwater Scourge. And so here's another thing that's a little bit unintuitive from a Magic player's perspective, is I'm making my attack with my guys, and if they chose not to block, I would not get a chance to cast any of my fast spells during combat. Typically, in Magic, you get a chance to see if they declare blockers, and then you can play your fast spells. But in this game, you kind of have to preemptively play your fast spells. There's kind of one chain of spells that you're allowed to play during combat, and by putting your attackers in and not playing any fast spells right off the bat, you're basically saying, I'm not going to play anything, and your opponent has to you basically say, I'm passing priority, and then if your opponent says, oh, I passed too, then combat just resolves, the whole chain resolves. So that's a little bit unintuitive, but I think it's really just different than Magic and other similar games. It's not really better or worse, it's just different. Looks like our opponent has our opponent has a really good spell to counteract what we're doing, so they're going to actually trade off on their guys. And since I lose the target of my spell, my spell just completely does not resolve, and my guy loses the Ephemeral. But that's okay, we kind of trade off boards here. Nothing too detrimental. I have a little bit of a stronger late game, I think, than they do, because we've got our big Hecarim and a big 10-cost spell. So I'm fine to go into the later game if we're both kind of trading off. The other mechanic that I really like about this game is the spell mana. So I had 1 extra mana at the end of last turn that I couldn't spend, just because, you know, my hand didn't line up that way. And in a lot of card games, that's going to be, you know, a big detriment to you in a lot of cases, that, oh, I don't get to cast my spell, this stinks, or I don't get to like use my mana efficiently, this kind of stinks. And that is true to sometimes. Like this turn, I'm not going to, but the mana carries over. You can bank up to 3 of it, and we're going to bank a little bit more because we have our hand doesn't quite work out. But this really like lessens the punishment. Normally I'd say, oh man, I didn't get to make a play that turn, I'm horribly behind. But now I get to play my 6-drop and have 3 mana back for a deny. So this is actually pretty powerful. It's mana that, of course, I can only spend on spells, but that means that a lot of decks are going to want to have a good, healthy mix of spells and units. So I think that encourages deck building diversity. You want to have a little bit of both. So now we can deny this. Perfect. Unless they have another trick up their sleeve, which could be a little problematic, but hopefully this deny solves all of our problems. Oh, I have to click OK. Some of these little things are a little bit clunky, the controls and kind of getting used to the back and forth and when you have to click OK and exactly what it means. But I hope they'll clean that up, I'm sure. And some of it just comes with experience. Like if once you know what's going on, then it becomes a lot more clear. So we got Hecarim, who summons a couple Spectral Riders when he attacks, but they're ephemeral, so they die at the end of the turn, and those bring back the Shark Chariot, who's kind of the main point of the deck. Of course, they've got a big Fiora, who's very scary as well. So it's a pretty even game. I don't feel like any player is particularly far ahead at this point. Maybe our opponent has a slight edge, because they have a unit on board and some mana to spend, but we've got... their life total is pretty low, and we could probably get them with 1 or 2 shots on our next attack step. So one thing I will say about this game is the games go pretty fast in comparison to games of Hearthstone or Magic or other card games in a similar genre. You know, this game could just be over, you know, on round 7 or 8 here. You know, if they had a bit more attack, maybe they could finish us off, or... I mean, we've got Withering Wail, which can save us some life total. But that's the idea that, you know, games are pretty typically over in this range of round 7 or 8. Even if neither player is really playing a super aggro deck. Just normal mid-rangey kind of decks can typically end around this time. Or if you're playing a control deck, maybe you end the game on round 9 or 10. And that's due to a couple of reasons. First off, every unit essentially has haste or charge, so they can attack the first turn you play them. If you have them in play, they can attack, and that means that, you know, you can play a big hitter and then just attack with it right away. But your life total is actually pretty low; it's only 20, and you can't actually life steal above that. So your life total is really capped at 20, and you know that means that you can find yourself in situations where you just get hit for most, if not all, of your life total in one hit. So we're going to play this big Harrowing. It's our big capstone spell, which we were only able to cast because of our spell mana. So typically, this wouldn't be a cast until turn 10, but because spell mana, essentially every spell can be cast up to 3 turns earlier if you have the appropriate spell mana and you kind of prepare for that ahead of time. And so that's going to be an interesting kind of design constraint on them, I think, going forward, where they're going to want to kind of, you know, think about that in how they design spells in the future. Oh, I guess I should have... I forgot I had to use our Challenger. That's another thing, like, she has Challenger, so she gets to choose who blocks, but I have to kind of determine that before I click OK there, which I wasn't used to playing with her, so didn't quite get that in. Regardless, our opponent surrendered because we hit them with a big 10 mana spell and they had very little answer, but that's a pretty typical game. I mean, neither of us is playing a super aggro deck. My deck is pretty aggressive, but we still ended the game on turn 8. So that's like a basic gameplay, and I mean, that was a big flashy ending that we got to win with. But I think that kind of highlights some of the things that I enjoyed about the game is that the spell mana in particular was a very good thing. The other thing I really like about the game right now is the awesome progression system. I know this is still in like a beta closed or like a preview state, so none of this progression really matters. Presumably they're going to have some sort of a reset on cards. But every single game you get experience, you get progress towards a faction that you choose, which will give you kind of faction specific rewards, as well as a weekly vault, which will just have chests that opens up once a week. So this has like a very well thought out and very generous free to play progression. You saw I completed a quest. There's a list of daily quests that I can go and take a look at that you can reroll on. They're all pretty achievable. They give bonus XP. And I think that progression system, the reward system, is very nice and it's very well thought out. And let's actually open up one of these rewards right now. We get a bunch of wild cards. So this is another thing to do with their card crafting system. In a lot of other games, you just have to buy packs and hope you get what you want. And if not, you disenchant it into dust and then you craft whatever you want at a really bad rate. This game gives you a lot of like wild cards that you can just turn this in for any common that you want or any rare that you want. So I think it's a very nice system. There's no packs to buy. You never buy a pack of cards. Any card that you want, you have to get the wild cards for, or there is some kind of a dust system. I think it's called a gem system. Let's take a look at the cards collection. And if I want to craft a card, there's some shards. I guess they're called shards, as well as wild cards to craft them. So that's the only way to acquire cards, is shards, wild cards, or just getting them from rewards, not from buying packs. So I think that's a nice system. What are some of the other things about it? Well, one of the defining characteristics of the game is the hero system. You have your normal units, like they work in Hearthstone and Magic, but you also have heroes, which, like Teemo here, have this level up mechanic. So they function mostly like units. You got a cost, you got attack and health, and you have this level up mechanic where each one of them has like a specific objective to level them up, and then you get them a level up for them. So Teemo here gets +1/+1 and has a new ability. Instead of adding more mushrooms, he doubles the number, which is almost certainly more than the 5 that they initially had. So every hero in the game has like this kind of powerful effect, and then they'll also have cards associated with them. Because these heroes are unique, so if you have 2 copies of Teemo, you have one in play, one in your hand. The one in hand can't be played, so instead it turns into a spell that at least in some way kind of synergizes with the hero itself. So I think that system is really innovative. To balance those out, since they most often are more powerful than the equivalent units, you can only include 6 champions in your deck, period. Doesn't matter if you can have 3 of a kind, you can have 6 different ones, you can have 2, 2, and 2. However you want to divide that up, you can run up to 6 champions. I like that idea that you can have these like variable power level things that aren't kind of always in play, like you saw in heroes, like kind of in Hearthstone with like the hero power that you always have access to. I thought that kind of led to monotonous game states where like, oh, I'm playing a warrior, I just always know I have this ability available. Whereas these heroes, these champions here are they're just like units. They go into your deck. You can build around them because they are quite powerful, but they play by the same rules as everybody else in a sense. They go on the board, you cast them, they have the stats, and they also can be variable power level. Obviously your 8 cost Tryndamere is going to be more powerful than your 1 cost Teemo. The other thing I think I'll say is, I think some of the card design is, it's a base set right now. It's the first set they're releasing. And I think some of the card design is a little bit forced. And maybe that's a little bit of a harsh term, but essentially when I look at cards, like let's look at just like Piltover and Zaun cards, okay? You've got 4 different heroes in Piltover Zaun. You've got Teemo, who wants poison cap mushrooms. You've got Ezreal, who likes targeting enemy units. You've got Jinx, who wants your hand to be empty. And you've got Heimerdinger, who wants you to cast spells. Most cards in the rest of this faction pretty kind of clearly align with one of these 4 heroes. And And not that that's a bad thing, but like you have like Jury Rig. Okay, says a card when cast or discarded, you summon a Scrap Scuttler. You got Rummage to play, discard 2, and then draw 2. And these other kind of like discard based synergies, clearly that's meant to go with something like Jinx, who wants your hand to be empty, so you want to be discarding a lot. And you've got guys like Eager Apprentice, who when summoned you refill your spell mana, so you want more spells, like Heimerdinger. Puffcap Peddler shovels more poison caps into their deck, pretty clearly must go in a Teemo deck. Same with Chump Wump, gives you more Mushroom Clouds. Static Shock targets 2 enemies, so that really wants to go into an Ezreal deck. And it seems like a lot of cards really kind of are shoehorned into, oh, this was designed for this hero in mind, or this idea. And there's not a whole lot of kind of just, oh, that's a generic, interesting kind of card. A generic's not a good word. That's an interesting card that does its own thing. How do I make that work? There's not a lot of cases of that. We can even go over to, or is it? I think it was Noxus with Vladimir. Yeah, Vladimir says he wants allies. He deals damage to your own allies, and then there's just like a whole subsection of units that clearly, like Crimson Disciple, that when they survive damage, do something. So like very clearly those are meant to be played with Vladimir, or like they're meant to build around their own synergy. And I feel like there's a lot of units that are a lot of cards that are a little bit too obviously forced into what they want to be, you know? Like the developers have already made the decks for you, and they say, oh, there's going to be a Vladimir deck that is going to run all of these Crimson guys. And like you just have to pick which ones are the best, because there's going to be more than enough to put in a deck. You just have to pick which ones are best. But there's not going to be ones that like, oh, I would have never thought to put that card in a Vladimir deck. Most every card that you want to put in, you probably already know that you want to put in because it has that line of text when you survive damage, or has like a heal effect or a deal damage effect. So, but that's like a kind of a nitpick. I know I spent a lot of time talking about that, but in a base set, I do like to kind of see that. I mean, you see that in every kind of card game, kind of these forced builds. I think maybe they go a little bit overboard on this just to kind of, you know, steer the players in the right direction. But that's something that can easily change between now and set release, or the game's release, as well as with new sets and new cards. Can easily take that into a different direction. And, you know, I mean, even with the current set, there is tons and tons of combinations of different playstyles. You've got, 4 heroes in 6 factions. You have 24 heroes. You can mix and match any of them in any way. So there's still lots of options and interesting ways to build your decks, even if some of the cards might be a little bit like, hey, you have to play it in this kind of build. The last thing I want to mention was something to do with the gameplay. It takes a little bit of getting used to like the your turn versus my turn kind of thing. I hinted on that during the game. I'm going to play a game against an AI so I can kind of show you exactly what I'm talking about here. Where a lot of like traditional card games, you think about, oh, it's my turn to act. It's my turn. I'm going to play my things, and then, you know, you have very limited interaction. You just have like instant or fast spells, right? These fast spells that you can cast, or other kind of specific interaction that is known to be played on the opponent's turn. In Legends of Runeterra, that's not the case. You have to kind of get rid of that idea of my turn, your turn. And so, like, even though it's not my turn going into the opponent's, you know, turn 2, it's not my attack turn, I still have the option to play, you know, just a unit. I can play a blocker. I can play a slow spell. I don't have slow spells in my hand. But, like, I could, in theory, they have 2 attackers. I can just play a slow spell to put out 3 blockers. And that's something that, you know, maybe this isn't the most impactful thing, but there are, like, destroy opposing units effects. And there's things that, like, destroy all opposing units, kind of like Wrath of God effects. And those can be played on the opponent's turn, which is a little bit weird and hard to get used to, I think, for a lot of Magic players. So I think that leads to some interesting ideas, interesting like puzzles to solve. Like, well, what is my turn? What is your turn? How does that impact your thinking? You can't ever think of it as it's my turn, you can't interact with me. It's just kind of a shared turn where I get to attack, but you don't. The other thing is with the spell mana and how that impacts the balance of the different styles of decks. So you've got, traditional card games, you've got aggressive decks, aggro decks, and then you've got like mid-rangey, and then you've got control on the opposite end. They want the game to go long and play a bunch of removal and things like that. Typically, aggro decks capitalize on the fact that they have all the low-cost units and cards and whatnot to punish opponents who don't have it. If they don't have an early play, then they're going to get punished for it, because I'm going to play a 1-drop and then a 2-drop and a 3-drop, and I'm going to hit you hard, and then you're going to get to turn 4 with just 4 mana, and you can't answer my 6 mana worth of people who are on board. That's not the case here in Legends of Runeterra, because you bank your spell mana. Anything that you don't use, you get to bank up to 3, which means the early game is a lot smoother for control decks. Aggro decks can't really punish them very easily. They can't say, oh, I'm just going to run you over because you didn't have early drops, but I did. So on one hand, that is like advantageous for the control deck, but it's also like deeply disadvantageous for aggressive decks. So kind of finding a good balance for that, I think, will be a challenge going forward for their design perspective and like how they want to craft the meta. You don't want either strategy, aggro or control, to be overly dominant. But given the current state of the game, I think it is in a good balance right now, because you have things like everybody having haste, so the games actually do go pretty quick, and that favors aggressive decks, since everybody can attack the turn that you play them. Whereas the control decks have a little bit of advantage because they're not going to fall that far behind in a lot of cases. They're not going to just get overrun by a 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, and then they have a bad hand. That's just not going to happen. They won't lose the game because of it. They may be behind, they may take some damage, but they're not going to just straight up lose because they, missed a 2-drop or something like that. And I think that's a healthy balance. That leads to some interactive games and some very interesting puzzles of like, when do I want to save my mana and bank it for future turns? When does it make more sense to just use it now? So overall, I'm really enjoying this game. I think it is a really promising innovation on like what we've seen from Hearthstone and Magic and other card games in the past. The spell mana system is great for a lot of the reasons that I've talked about today. To me, it's like the defining feature of the game, because it introduces so much of that flexibility to your curve. People would meme about, curve stone. The whole game of Hearthstone is all about hitting your curve, and that's just simply not the case here. So I like to see that. And also the alternating attack and defense presents new and interesting challenges to solve from a card gamer's perspective who may not have encountered something like this before, because it is such an interesting take on the combat system. So overall, this game is still in early access. It won't be like kind of fully released until probably early 2020. So you got plenty of time. It'll be in a preview patch for just like another day or two, and then it'll go offline for I think about a month, and then in November it'll come back for another week. And there they'll introduce the draft patch. They'll introduce some draft mechanics, so that'll be interesting to see how that works. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. I've got some pretty high hopes for it, and I'm enjoying it a lot. If you haven't checked it out, I don't know if there'll be enough time for you to get into the beta since it's ending tomorrow, I think. But definitely go check out any streamers who are streaming it, and just go pre-register for it at playruneterra.com, and then you can get the chance to get into the beta when it comes back in November. So I hope you enjoyed this look at the initial thoughts and gameplay, and I hope you enjoy the game as much as I've been enjoying it as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.